October 15, 2019, Marcus Chun had driven into Millbrook for nothing more than groceries and diesel fuel. But what he found behind the abandoned chapel would haunt him forever. A young woman in a tattered wedding dress. Barely conscious, her lips cracked and bleeding as she whispered those desperate words. "Please have mercy." The police would later call it the most disturbing case they'd ever seen. But what shocked everyone most wasn't what had been done to her. It was the truth about who had left her there to die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chun's truck rattled over the potholed county road. His daughter's shopping list crumpled on the passenger seat beside a thermos of cold coffee. The October sun hung low over the Montana plains, casting long shadows across abandoned farmhouses that dotted the landscape like forgotten tombstones. He'd made this drive to Millbrook 100 times since moving to the ranch 3 years ago. But today something felt different, a heaviness in the air that made the hair on his neck stand up. 8-year-old Emma had stayed behind with Mrs. Kowalski, their neighbor who watched her every other Saturday while Marcus handled the supply runs. The list was longer than usual. Flour, sugar, Emma's favorite cereal, diesel for the tractor, new work gloves, antibiotics for the cattle. Winter was coming early this year, and he needed to be prepared. The ranch didn't forgive mistakes. Millbrook appeared on the horizon like a faded photograph, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled together against the vastness of the prairie. Population 847, according to the sun-bleached sign at the town limits, though Marcus suspected that number was optimistic. Main Street consisted of a general store, a gas station, a diner that served breakfast all day, and the First Methodist Church with its white steeple piercing the cloudless sky. He pulled into Harvey's General Store just after 2 o'clock. The parking lot was nearly empty except for Sheriff Dawson's cruiser and a rusted Chevy that had been there so long. Weeds grew through the wheel wells. Marcus grabbed his wallet and stepped out, stretching his back after the 40-minute drive. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant rain dot inside. Harvey stood behind the counter reading a newspaper from 3 days ago, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The old man looked up and nodded, the extent of his usual greeting. Marcus appreciated that about Harvey. No unnecessary small talk. No prying questions about why a computer engineer from Seattle had given it all up to raise cattle in the middle of nowhere. "Diesel pumps acting up again," Harvey said, folding his newspaper. "Might take longer than usual." Marcus nodded and began gathering items from his list. The store smelled like coffee and sawdust, familiar and comforting. He moved through the narrow aisles with practiced efficiency, loading his cart with supplies. Emma's cereal, the one with the cartoon tiger. Check. Work gloves to replace. The pair he'd torn on barbed wire last week. Check. A new thermos because his had finally given up the ghost dot at the register. Harvey rang up each item with methodical slowness, his arthritic fingers punching the keys of a cash register that had to be older than Marcus. The total came to $247, more than he'd budgeted, but there was no choice. You couldn't negotiate with Winter. "Heard you fixed the south fence," Harvey said, making change. "Most of it. Still got a quarter-mile to go. Best get to it before the snow flies." Harvey handed him his receipt and a piece of butterscotch candy. He did this every time, and Marcus had stopped refusing. "Storm's coming in next week, according to my knee." Marcus pocketed the candy and loaded the supplies into his truck bed, securing everything with bungee cords. The diesel pump wheezed and sputtered as he filled the 5-gallon cans, taking nearly 20 minutes for what should have been a 10-minute job. He checked his watch. 3:15. He'd promised Emma he'd be home by 5 for their Saturday movie night. They were halfway through a marathon of adventure films, and tonight was her pick. He was securing the last can when he noticed the old Chapel.sd Augustine's had been abandoned for as long as Marcus had lived in the area, maybe longer. The building sat at the edge of town, separated from the main street by an overgrown field and a collapsing fence. Its white paint had peeled away years ago, exposing gray wood beneath. The steeple tilted slightly to the left, giving the whole structure a drunken appearance. Local kids claimed it was haunted, though Marcus suspected that was just small-town mythology. But something about it caught his attention now. Maybe it was the way the late afternoon light hit the broken windows. Or maybe it was instinct, the same instinct that had saved his life twice during his army stint before he'd met Emma's mother. He stood by his truck, staring at the chapel, trying to identify what was bothering him. A flash of white. There, near the back of the building, barely visible through the tall grass. A piece of fabric, maybe. A tarp blown loose from someone's property. Nothing worth investigating. Marcus opened his truck door, ready to leave. Then he saw it move. Not like fabric caught in the wind. This was deliberate, purposeful. Someone was back there. His first thought was teenagers looking for a place to drink or smoke where their parents wouldn't find them. His second thought was that it wasn't his problem. But the third thought, the one that made him close the truck door and walk toward the chapel, was simpler. What if someone needed help? The grass was waist-high and brittle, crunching under his boots. He pushed through, keeping his eyes on the white shape. As he got closer, details emerged. Not a tarp. Not teenagers. A dress. A wedding dress. His pace quickened. The dress was filthy, torn in several places, the train tangled in the weeds. And there was someone wearing it. Hello? His voice came out rougher than intended. Are you okay? No response. Marcus broke into a jog, his heart hammering. The figure was slumped against the back wall of the chapel, partially hidden by an overgrown lilac bush that had gone wild. As he rounded the corner, his boot caught on something, a broken bottle, and he stumbled, catching himself on the weathered siding. That's when he saw her face. She was young mid-20s, maybe. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and covered with dirt and scratches. Dark hair hung in matted tangles around her shoulders. The wedding dress, which might have been beautiful once, was now a nightmare of stains and tears. Her feet were bare, cut and bleeding. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They were open, staring at him with an expression that mixed terror and desperate hope in equal measure. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please have mercy." Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed completely. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his training kicking in automatically. He checked her pulse, rapid and weak, but present. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was cold to the touch despite the warm afternoon. Dehydration, definitely. Possibly exposure. God knew what else. He pulled out his phone. No signal, not unusual out here. The nearest hospital was in Billings, over an hour away, even if he broke every speed limit. She needed water, warmth, immediate medical attention. "Stay with me," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. He stripped off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then carefully lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, and that terrified him more than the blood on her dress or the bruises on her arms. The walk back to his truck felt endless. People were staring now. Harvey had come out of the store, along with two customers Marcus didn't recognize. Sheriff Dawson emerged from the diner, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon before he recognized Marcus. "What the hell?" Dawson started. "Found her behind St. Augustine's," Marcus said, not breaking stride. "She needs a hospital, now." Dawson's expression shifted from suspicion to professional concern. "Put her in my cruiser. I can get her to Billings faster with lights and sirens." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him not to let her go, not to trust anyone else with this broken woman in his arms. But logic won out. Dawson could get her help faster than he could. They laid her across the back seat of the cruiser. In the better light, Marcus could see more details that made his stomach turn. The bruises weren't random, they had patterns, shapes. Finger marks. Rope burns on her wrists, barely visible beneath the lace sleeves. And her feet, Jesus, her feet looked like she'd walked miles on broken glass. Who is she? Dawson asked, already on his radio calling for an ambulance to meet them halfway. No idea. She said something before she passed out. Please have mercy. Dawson's jaw tightened. He'd been sheriff of Harrison County for 15 years, and Marcus could see him running through scenarios, none of them good. You didn't touch anything back there? No, just her. Good, I'll have to rope it off as a scene. Dawson slammed the back door and moved to the driver's side. I'll need a statement from you. Tomorrow morning, my office. Marcus nodded, watching as the cruiser peeled out of the parking lot, lights flashing, headed toward the highway. Other people had gathered, now a small crowd by Millbrook standards. Half a dozen faces, all wearing the same expression of shock and morbid curiosity. Harvey approached him, the butterscotch candy still in his weathered hand. That was a good thing you did, son. Marcus didn't feel good. He felt sick. He looked down at his hands, they were shaking. There was blood on his sleeve, not much, but enough to make it real. He thought about Emma, waiting at home with Mrs. Kowalski, excited about movie night. He thought about the woman in the wedding dress, about what she'd endured to end up behind an abandoned chapel, alone and terrified. I need to make a call, he said to no one in particular. Harvey gestured toward the store. Phone's inside. Help yourself. Marcus walked back through the familiar aisles, but everything looked different now. The normalcy of cereal boxes and canned goods felt obscene after what he'd just seen. He picked up Harvey's landline and dialed Mrs. Kowalski's number. She answered on the third ring. Marcus, everything all right? I'm going to be late, he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Something came up. Can you stay with Emma until I get back? Of course, dear. We're making cookies. Take your time. He thanked her and hung up, then stood there for a moment, staring at the phone. The store was empty. Harvey had stayed outside with the others, probably spreading the news. In a town like Millbrook, this would be the only topic of conversation for weeks. Marcus walked back outside. The crowd had grown larger, and he could hear snippets of speculation. Must be that missing girl from Billings. Looks like a runaway bride. Probably drugs involved. He ignored them and returned to his truck. The supplies still needed to be secured. The diesel cans still needed to make it home. Life continued, even when it shouldn't. As he worked, his mind replayed every detail. The way she'd looked at him with those terrified eyes. The whisper, please have mercy. Not help me or save me, mercy. Like she expected judgment, not rescue. Like she'd been conditioned to beg. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the prairie in shades of orange and red. Marcus finished loading the truck and climbed into the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, he could see people still gathered around the general store, still talking, still speculating. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving them behind. The drive home was automatic, his hand steering while his mind churned through questions. Who was she? How long had she been there? Why was she wearing a wedding dress in the middle of nowhere? And most importantly, who had hurt her? Because someone had. That much was clear from the bruises, the rope burns, the absolute terror in her eyes. Someone had done something terrible to that woman and left her to die behind an abandoned church. The ranch appeared ahead, the house lights warm against the gathering darkness. Marcus could see Emma's silhouette in the kitchen window, probably watching for his return. Mrs. Kowalski's car was still in the driveway. Everything looked peaceful, normal, safe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He pulled in and killed the engine, sitting in the cab for a moment longer. Tomorrow he'd give his statement to Sheriff Dawson. Tomorrow the investigation would begin. Tomorrow he'd try to find out what happened to the woman in the wedding dress. But tonight, he had a daughter who needed him, who was counting on movie night and popcorn and the simple comfort of routine. Tonight, he would hold Emma close and be grateful for every ordinary moment. Because now he knew how quickly the ordinary could shatter. He grabbed the supplies and headed inside. Where his daughter was waiting, Emma launched herself at Marcus the moment he walked through the door, wrapping her arms around his waist with the enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could muster. "Dad, you're finally home. Mrs. Kowalski taught me how to make snickerdoodles, and I didn't even burn them." Marcus set down the supply bags and hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with cinnamon. For a moment, he let himself exist only in this space, the warmth of his daughter, the smell of fresh cookies, the safety of home. "They smell amazing." "Sweetheart." He released her and looked up to see Mrs. Kowalski in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The elderly woman's sharp eyes studied his face, and he knew she'd already detected something wrong. "Everything all right, Marcus?" she asked quietly. "Long day," he said, which was true enough. "Thanks for staying late." "Anytime, dear. Emma and I had a wonderful time." She gathered her purse and cardigan, pausing at the door. "You look pale. Make sure you eat something." After she left, Emma dragged Marcus toward the living room where she'd already set up their movie night blankets arranged on the couch. Popcorn bowls ready, the DVD menu frozen on the screen. She'd chosen The Princess Bride, one of her favorites. And normally Marcus would have teased her about picking a romance. Tonight, he just sat down and let her snuggle against his side. The movie played, but Marcus barely registered it. His mind kept returning to the chapel, to those terrified eyes, to the whispered plea for mercy. Emma laughed at the sword fights and quoted her favorite lines, and he responded on autopilot. His body present while his thoughts remained 40 miles away in Millbrook around 9 o'clock. Emma's breathing deepened into sleep. Marcus carried her to bed, tucking the blankets around her small frame and kissing her forehead. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about pirates, then fell back into dreams. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, struck by how fragile safety really was in his own room. Marcus stripped off his clothes and noticed the blood on his sleeve again. He'd forgotten about it during movie night, but now it seemed to glow in the lamplight, a reminder of what he'd witnessed. He threw the shirt in the bathroom sink and ran cold water over it, watching the crimson swirl down the drain. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the hollowness of her cheeks, the bruises mapping violence across her skin, the absolute defeat in her expression. At 2 in the morning, he gave up and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The ranch was silent, except for the usual nighttime sounds, the wind against the siding, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of old wood settling. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and Emma's homework scattered in front of her usual spot, trying to make sense of what he'd found, a bride. In the middle of nowhere. Starving and beaten and terrified, where had she come from? The nearest wedding venue was in Billings, over an hour away. Had she walked, run? Been brought there and abandoned? And why St. Augustine specifically? Was it random, or had someone chosen that location deliberately? His phone buzzed a text from Sheriff Dawson. "She's stable. Billings General, ICU. Can you come in at 8 a.m. for a statement?" Marcus replied with a simple yes and set the phone down. Stable, that was something. Not good, not recovered, but alive. He'd take it. The pre-dawn hours crawled by. At 5:30, Marcus gave up on sleep entirely and started his morning routine, feeding the cattle, checking water troughs, inspecting fence lines. The physical labor helped quiet his mind. gave him something concrete to focus on. By the time Emma wandered into the kitchen at 7, still in her pajamas and rubbing sleep from her eyes, he'd already been up for hours. "Morning, Bug," he said, pouring her orange juice. "What do you want for breakfast?" "Pancakes." She climbed into her chair, legs swinging. "Can we put chocolate chips in them?" "It's Sunday." "Why not?" They cooked together, Emma carefully measuring ingredients while Marcus worked the griddle. It was their routine, this easy partnership in the kitchen, and it steadied him. This was real. This was what mattered. His daughter, safe and happy, making a mess with flour and giggling when chocolate chips escaped the bowl. At 7:45, he called Mrs. Kowalski again. "I hate to ask, but could Emma spend a few hours with you this morning? I have something I need to take care of in town." "Of course. Bring her over whenever you're ready." Emma protested. Sundays were usually their day together, but perked up when Mrs. Kowalski mentioned teaching her to knit. Marcus drove her to the neighboring ranch, watched her disappear inside with her overnight bag, just in case things took longer than expected, and headed back toward Millbrook. The sheriff's office occupied a small brick building next to the fire station. Marcus had only been inside once before, shortly after moving to the area, when Dawson had stopped by to introduce himself and run a friendly background check. The sheriff believed in knowing his constituents, especially the new ones. Dawson was waiting in his office, a cup of coffee in hand and files spread across his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw shattered with stubble. "Marcus, thanks for coming in." He gestured to a chair. "Coffee?" "I'm good." Dawson sat across from him, pulling out a notepad. "I need you to walk me through yesterday, from the moment you arrived in town. Every detail you can remember." Marcus did, starting with the diesel pump and ending with loading the woman into the cruiser. Dawson took notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify timing or observations. The whole recounting took about 20 minutes. "Did you recognize her?" Dawson asked, never seen her before. "Notice any vehicles near St. Augustine's? Anyone watching?" "No, place looked abandoned, like always." Dawson leaned back, rubbing his face. "We processed the scene last night. Found some things. Rope tied to a beam inside the chapel. Empty water bottles. Candy bar wrappers. She was in there for a while, Marcus. Days, maybe." The image made Marcus's stomach turn. Tied up, alone, in an abandoned building where no one would hear her scream. "The wedding dress," Marcus said. "Any idea? We're checking missing persons reports, reaching out to venues, bridal shops." "Nothing yet." Dawson pulled out a photograph and slid it across the desk. "Does this help?" It was a professional photo, probably from a driver's license or passport. The woman looked different, healthy, smiling, her dark hair styled. But Marcus recognized the eyes. "That's her." "Who is she?" "Can't say yet. She hasn't been conscious long enough to tell us much, and we need to verify identity first." Dawson took the photo back. "But between you and me, this isn't random. Someone planned this. Someone wanted her to suffer. The bruises, yeah, we documented everything. Some are old, some are new. Pattern suggests prolonged abuse." Dawson's expression hardened. Whoever did this, they're still out there. The implications hung in the air between them. Marcus thought about his isolated ranch, about Emma, about how much distance really mattered when someone was determined enough. "You think I'm in danger? Because I found her? I think you should be careful. Lock your doors. Keep your phone charged. If you see anything unusual, call me immediately." Dawson stood, signaling the end of the interview. "We're doing everything we can to find who did this. In the meantime, you did good yesterday. You saved her life." Marcus wasn't so sure about that. He'd found her, yes, But someone had put her there in the first place. Someone who might not appreciate the rescue. He left the sheriff's office feeling more unsettled than when he'd arrived. The drive back toward Mrs. Kowalski's ranch took him past St. Augustine's again. Yellow crime scene tape now surrounded the property, fluttering in the morning breeze. A deputy's car sat in the overgrown parking lot. Though Marcus couldn't see anyone inside, he slowed down without meaning to, staring at the old chapel. In daylight, it looked even more decrepit, a monument to decay and neglect. Hard to believe something so terrible had happened in a place most people forgot existed. A figure emerged from behind the building, Deputy Marshal, Dawson's second in command. She carried evidence bags and wore latex gloves. When she spotted Marcus's truck, she raised a hand in acknowledgement, but didn't approach. He drove on. Mrs. Kowalski's ranch appeared around the next bend. Marcus found Emma in the barn, tangled up in yarn and laughing while Mrs. Kowalski patiently untangled her. The sight of his daughter's joy was like cold water on a burn, shocking and necessary. "Dad, look, I'm making the scarf. Well, I'm trying to. It's kind of lumpy. It's perfect," he said, meaning it. He thanked Mrs. Kowalski and loaded Emma back into the truck. "Where did you go?" Emma asked as they pulled out of the driveway. "Just had to help the sheriff with something." "Like police stuff?" "Sort of." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Kowalski said something happened in town yesterday. Something bad. She wouldn't tell me what." Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. Of course the news had spread. In a place like Millbrook, secrets had a half-life measured in hours. "I found someone who needed help," he said carefully. "Sheriff Dawson is handling it now. Did you save them?" "I hope so, Bug." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer and launched into a detailed explanation of knitting techniques. Marcus let her chatter wash over him, grateful for the distraction. At home, the answering machine blinked with messages. Marcus played them while Emma went to change out of her yarn-covered clothes. 3 were from neighbors he barely knew, offering vague help if he needed anything. One was from Harvey saying, Marcus's loyalty card at the store had enough points for a free coffee. The last was from a number he didn't recognize, a woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Mr. Chun, this is Dr. Patricia Rothman from Billings General Hospital. I'm treating the patient you brought in yesterday. When you have a moment, could you please call me back? It's important." Marcus's heart rate kicked up. He dialed the number immediately. Dr. Rothman answered on the second ring. "Mr. Chun, thank you for calling back. I wanted to update you on your friend's condition. She's not my friend. I just found her." "Ah, I see. Well, she's stable now, though still in intensive care. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, multiple contusions, some infected wounds. She's going to need time to recover." A pause. "She also asked for you." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. "What?" When she regained consciousness this morning, she was disoriented and frightened. The only thing she said clearly was that she needed to talk to the man who found her. "She described you: dark hair, kind eyes, gentle hands. That's you, isn't it?" Yeah, but I don't understand why she'd want to see me." "Neither do we. But she became quite agitated when we said we didn't know how to contact you. Sheriff Dawson provided your information, with your permission, of course. Would you be willing to visit?" Everything in Marcus wanted to say no. He'd done his part. He'd found her, gotten her help. Getting further involved meant complications, questions, potential danger. He had Emma to think about, but he remembered those terrified eyes, the whispered plea for mercy. "When?" he asked. "Visiting hours are 2 to 8. She's in the ICU, room 447. I should warn you, she's very fragile, both physically and emotionally. We'll have security present, and I'll need to approve the visit first." "I understand." After hanging up, Marcus stood in his kitchen for a long moment. The house smelled like the pancakes they'd made that morning, like normalcy and routine. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator crayon drawings of horses and rainbows, and the two of them holding hands. This was his life. This was what he'd built after everything fell apart 3 years ago. And now there was a woman in a hospital bed who'd asked for him specifically, whose suffering had somehow become entangled with his quiet existence. Emma appeared in the doorway. "Dad? You okay?" He turned and smiled, though it felt like moving through water. "Yeah, Bug, just thinking. About the person you helped? Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. Yeah. Are they going to be okay?" "I think so. Eventually." Emma walked over and hugged him, her small arms surprisingly strong. "You're a good person, Dad. Mom would be proud." The mention of Sarah, Emma's mother, his wife, gone 3 years, now hit him like a physical blow. But Emma was right. Sarah would have insisted he help, would have been furious if he'd walked away. She'd always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. "Thanks, sweetheart," he said, holding her close. "What do you say we work on that fence this afternoon? Get it finished before the weather turns. Can I use the post-hole digger? Under supervision?" They spent the afternoon in honest labor, stretching barbed wire and sinking posts into the hard Montana ground. The physical work cleared Marcus's head, gave him time to think without overthinking. By the time the sun started its descent, they'd completed the remaining quarter-mile. The south pasture was finally secure. That night, after Emma went to bed, Marcus sat on the porch with a beer he didn't really want and stared at the stars. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and quiet, peaceful, safe. But somewhere out there was the person who'd done those terrible things. Someone who might be looking for the woman he'd found. Someone who might not appreciate interference. His phone buzzed, another text from Dawson. Billings PD identified her. "My name's Victoria Brennan, 26, from Seattle. Reported missing 2 weeks ago by her sister. We're bringing the sister in tomorrow for formal ID. Thought you should know." Victoria Brennan. She had a name now, a history, people who loved her enough to report her missing. Marcus wondered what her story was, how she'd ended up behind St. Augustine's in a ruined wedding dress. Tomorrow he'd drive to Billings. Tomorrow he'd find out what she wanted to tell him. Tonight, he'd sit on his porch and be grateful for the simple fact that she was alive. Monday morning arrived with frost on the ground and a sky the color of steel. Marcus woke before dawn again, his sleep fractured by dreams he couldn't quite remember, but that left him with a sense of unease. He went through his morning routine, mechanically coffee, cattle feed, checking Emma's backpack for school. The bus picked Emma up at 7:15. And she waved enthusiastically from the window as it pulled away down the long dirt road. Marcus watched until it disappeared, then went inside to change. He'd told Emma he had business in Billings, which was true enough. She didn't need to know the specifics. The drive took 70 minutes in morning traffic. Billings General Hospital was a sprawling complex of modern buildings that looked out of place against the Montana landscape. Marcus parked in the visitor lot and sat in his truck for a moment, steeling himself. He didn't know what to expect, what Victoria would say, what she wanted, why she'd asked for him specifically. The ICU was on the 4th floor, Marcus checked. In at the nurse's station, where a tired-looking woman verified his ID and called Dr. Rothman. The doctor appeared 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd seen everything medicine had to offer. "Mr. Chun, thank you for coming." She shook his hand with a firm grip. "Before you go in, I need to prepare you. Victoria's physical injuries are healing, but psychologically she's extremely fragile. She's been through significant trauma. If at any point she becomes distressed, we'll end the visit immediately." "I understand. Security will be present, and a trauma counselor will be available if needed. We're treating this very carefully." Dr. Rothman studied his face. "She seems to believe you're the only person she can trust. Do you have any idea why? None. I'd never seen her before Saturday. Trauma does strange things to the mind. Sometimes survivors fixate on their rescuer as a symbol of safety. Just be gentle and truthful. She needs stability right now. They walked down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Room 447 was at the end, and a security guard stood outside, a broad-shouldered man who nodded at Dr. Rothman. She knocked softly, then opened the door. The woman in the bed barely resembled the broken figure Marcus had found behind the chapel. She was clean now, her dark hair brushed back, wearing a hospital gown instead of that ruined wedding dress. But she was still painfully thin, her face gaunt, dark circles under her eyes. And 4 drip fed into her arm, and monitors beeped softly beside the bed. When she saw Marcus, her entire body tensed. For a moment he thought she'd scream, call for help, realize she'd made a mistake asking for him. But then her expression shifted recognition, followed by something that might have been relief. "You came," she whispered. "The doctor said you wanted to talk." Marcus stayed near the door, giving her space. "I'm Marcus Chun. I'm the one who found you." "I know. I remember." Her voice was rough, like she'd been screaming. Maybe she had. "You asked if I was okay. You gave me your jacket. It seemed like you needed it." Victoria's hands twisted in the blanket, her fingers trembling. "I didn't think anyone would find me. I thought I was going to die there." Dr. Rothman stepped forward. "Victoria, you're safe now. No one can hurt you here. But if you want to tell Mr. Chung what happened, you should know that anything you say could be part of a police investigation. I've already talked to the police. They don't believe me." Victoria's eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was almost frightening. "But maybe you will." Marcus moved closer, settling into the chair beside her bed. The security guard positioned himself by the door, watching but not interfering. "Try me." Victoria took a shaking breath. "My name is Victoria Brennan. I lived in Seattle, worked as a paralegal, had an apartment in Capitol Hill, normal boring life. 6 months ago, I met someone. His name was Derek Sutherland." The name hung in the air like smoke. Marcus glanced at Dr. Rothman, who was taking notes on a tablet. "Derek was charming," Victoria continued, "successful. He owned some kind of consulting business, traveled a lot, always had money. We met at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. He seemed perfect, attentive, romantic, interested in everything about me. Within 3 weeks, he proposed." "That's fast," Marcus said carefully. "I know, everyone told me so. My sister Jenna, my friends, even my boss. They all said it was too quick, that I barely knew him. But I was." She paused, her jaw clenching. "I was lonely. My parents died 2 years ago in a car accident. I didn't have anyone except Jenna, and she was busy with her own family. Derek made me feel seen, wanted, safe." The irony of that last word wasn't lost on Marcus. "We planned a small wedding. Nothing fancy, just close friends and family at a venue outside Seattle. October 15th was supposed to be our day." Victoria's voice dropped to barely audible. "It was our day, just not the way I imagined." Dr. Rothman set down her tablet. "Victoria, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Victoria's eyes never left Marcus, because he's still out there. And he's going to do this again. Marcus felt ice run down his spine. "Do what again?" "The morning of the wedding, Derek picked me up early, said he wanted to show me something, a surprise. I thought maybe he'd arranged some romantic gesture, breakfast overlooking the water, something like that. Instead, he drove for hours. I didn't realize how far we'd gone until it was too late. When I asked where we were going, he just smiled and said it was a surprise." She was gripping the blanket so tightly now her knuckles were white. Marcus wanted to tell her to stop that. She didn't need to relive this, but he sensed she needed to speak more than she needed protecting. "We ended up in Montana. I'd never been to Montana. Derek said we were going to get married in a special place, somewhere meaningful. By then I was scared, but I kept telling myself everything was fine, that I was being paranoid. A bitter laugh escaped her throat. We stopped at this abandoned church, St. Augustine's, I found out later. Derek said it was where his parents got married, that it was a family tradition. But that wasn't true, Marcus said quietly. Nothing he told me was true. The business, the money, the fundraiser where we met, he'd bought a ticket specifically to meet professional women. Successful women. Women who wouldn't be immediately missed because they were independent and private. Victoria's eyes glistened with tears. I wasn't his first. The room fell silent except for the beeping monitors. Dr. Rothman had stopped taking notes and was staring at Victoria with barely concealed horror. When we got inside the church, he changed. Like flipping a switch. Suddenly he wasn't Derek anymore. He was someone else. Something else. He had rope ready, like he'd planned everything. He tied me up in the back room, said we were going to have a real ceremony. A permanent one. Marcus's jaw tightened. He was going to kill you. Eventually. But first he wanted to break me. He said that was the point, to see how long it took for someone to stop being a person and start being a thing. He'd leave for hours, sometimes days, and I'd be alone in the dark with no food, barely any water. When he came back, her voice cracked, he'd test me. See if I was broken it yet. Jesus Christ, Marcus breathed. The wedding dress was part of it. He made me wear it the whole time, said brides were supposed to be pure and obedient. Every time I disobeyed, every time I fought back or tried to escape, he'd punish me. The bruises, the cuts, those were lessons. He was teaching me to beg. Dr. Rothman stood abruptly. I think that's enough for today. No. Victoria's voice was stronger now, defiant. Mr. Chun needs to hear this. Everyone needs to hear this. Because Derek Sutherland is out there right now, probably finding his next victim, and nobody believes me. Why wouldn't they believe you? Marcus asked. Because Derek Sutherland doesn't exist. That's not his real name. The police ran it through every database, nothing. No records, no business registration, no social media presence. The fundraiser where we met? He bought the ticket with cash through a third party. The consulting business? A shell company that dissolved the day after he took me. Even the apartment where he claimed to live, it was a short-term rental paid in advance, vacated the week of our wedding. Marcus tried to process this. He planned everything, down to the last detail. He studied me for months before we ever met, learned my routines, my vulnerabilities, my weaknesses. By the time he introduced himself, he already knew exactly how to manipulate me. Victoria wiped at her eyes angrily. The police think I'm confused, that the trauma scrambled my memories. They're looking for Derek Sutherland, but they won't find him because that person never existed. But you're alive, Marcus said. How did you get away? For the first time, something like a smile crossed Victoria's face. I didn't. He left me there to die. Said he was done with me, that I'd broken too easily and it wasn't satisfying anymore. He untied me, walked out, and never came back. Left me in that church with no food, no water, no way to call for help. My phone was long gone. He'd destroyed it the first day. How long were you there? 12 days total. The last 4, I was alone. I tried to walk out, but I was so weak, and my feet. She glanced down at her bandaged extremities. I made it maybe a quarter mile before I collapsed. Crawled back to the church because at least there was shade. I thought that's where I'd die. Marcus remembered finding her, the desperation in her eyes, the whispered plea for mercy. Why did you say that? Please have mercy. Because I thought you were him. Coming back to finish what he started, Victoria met his gaze. But you weren't. You saved me instead. Do you understand how rare that is? How many people would have just kept driving? Most people would have helped, Marcus said, uncomfortable with the weight she was placing on his actions. Maybe, but you're the one who did. That matters. Dr. Rothman cleared her throat. Victoria, the police are taking this very seriously. Just because they haven't found him yet doesn't mean they're looking in the wrong places. They're looking for Derek Sutherland, a man who never existed. They should be looking for patterns, other women, other disappearances. Victoria turned back to Marcus. That's why I wanted to talk to you. You found me by accident. Maybe you can find the others. Others? Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. He told me about them, bragged about them, sighed I was number 4, and that the first 3 taught him patience. He said they're all in Montana, spread out across the state in places no one looks, places like St. Augustine's. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper now. He said Montana was perfect because it's so big and empty, because people disappear here all the time and nobody questions it. Marcus stood up, suddenly needing space. He walked to the window and stared out at the parking lot below, trying to organize his thoughts. 3 other women, possibly dead, hidden somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness by a man with no name and no identity. The police need to hear this, he said. They have heard it. They think it's a trauma-induced illusion that I'm creating. A conspiracy because it's easier than accepting I was fooled by a regular predator. Victoria's frustration was palpable, but I'm not crazy. I know what I heard. I know what he told me. Dr. Rothman moved to Victoria's bedside, checking her monitors. Your heart rate is elevated. We should stop. I'm fine. Victoria pushed her hand away, then immediately apologized. I'm sorry, I need people to believe me. I need someone to look. Marcus turned back from the window. Did he tell you anything specific? Names, locations, dates? No names. But locations, he mentioned places. One was near a lake with an unusual name. Something that sounded Native American. Another was in the mountains, somewhere with old mining equipment. And the first one. Victoria closed her eyes, concentrating. He said the first one was practice. He buried her in a pasture where cattle grazed because he wanted to see if animals would disturb the site. He was testing methods. The clinical nature of it made Marcus feel sick. This wasn't a crime of passion or impulse. This was methodical, scientific. The man Victoria described was treating murder like research. I'll talk to Sheriff Dawson, Marcus said. Tell him what you told me. He's thorough. If there are other victims, he'll find them. Will you help? Victoria asked suddenly. Will you look for them? I'm not a detective. I'm just a rancher. You're someone who looks at abandoned places. Who pays attention. Who cares enough to stop. Victoria's eyes were pleading now. The police have procedures and jurisdictions and bureaucracy. You have. She gestured vaguely. Freedom, time, local knowledge. I have a daughter. A ranch to run. I can't gesture. I had a sister. A job. A life. Victoria's voice was sharp. And now I'm here, and 3 other women are still out there. And the man who did this is probably already planning number 5. So please, Mr. Chun, help me find them before it's too late. Marcus looked at Dr. Rothman, who was frowning but said nothing. The security guard remained impassive by the door. Outside, Billings went about its business. People living their lives, unaware that somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness, 3 women might be waiting to be found. He thought about Emma, about the life he built, about how getting involved in this would complicate everything. But he also thought about Victoria's sister Jenna, who'd reported her missing and spent 2 weeks not knowing if she was alive or dead. About 3 other families who might still be searching. About a predator who treated women like experiments. I'll do what I can, he heard himself say. But I'm not making any promises. Victoria sagged back against her pillows, relief evident on her face. Thank you. That's all I can ask. Dr. Rothman escorted Marcus out a few minutes later, leaving Victoria to rest. In the hallway, the doctor pulled him aside, her expression grave. "I need to be clear about something," she said quietly. "Victoria Brennan has suffered severe trauma. Her story is consistent, and her physical injuries support what she's told us. But post-traumatic stress can create false memories or elaborate on real ones. The details about other victims could be accurate, or they could be her mind's way of processing her own ordeal." "You think she's making it up?" "I think she believes what she's telling you. Whether it's objectively true is something only investigation can determine." Dr. Rothman sighed. "Just be careful. For her sake and yours. This kind of case can consume people." Marcus thanked her and made his way to the elevator. As he descended to the parking lot, he pulled out his phone and called Sheriff Dawson. "I need to talk to you," Marcus said when Dawson answered. "About Victoria Brennan and what she told me. I'm listening." "Not over the phone. This is bigger than what happened at St. Augustine's." There was a pause then. "My office." 2 hours. Marcus hung up and climbed into his truck. The drive back to Millbrook gave him time to think about everything Victoria had said. About Derek Sutherland, who didn't exist. About 3 other women, possibly buried in the Montana wilderness. About a predator who was still hunting. He'd come to Montana 3 years ago for peace and anonymity, to raise his daughter far from the complications of his old life. Now he was being pulled into a nightmare that stretched across the state, involving victims he'd never met and a killer with no name. Victoria was right about one thing: he'd found her by accident. Maybe he could find the others the same way. Maybe paying attention to abandoned places and empty spaces was exactly what this case needed. Or maybe he was making a terrible mistake that would endanger everything he'd built. Only time would tell. Sheriff Dawson's office felt smaller than Marcus remembered, the walls closing in as he recounted everything Victoria had told him. Dawson listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad that was already half filled with cramped handwriting. When Marcus finished, silence stretched between them. Dawson set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. 3 other victims, Dawson finally said. Spread across Montana. No specific locations, no names, no timeline beyond before Victoria. That's what we're working with? She said he bragged about them. Gave some details about the locations. A lake with a Native American name, old mining equipment in mountains. A cattle pasture for the first victim. Do you know how many lakes in Montana have Native American names? How many abandoned mines? How many cattle pastures? Dawson rubbed his temples. We're talking about the 4th largest state in the country. Over 147,000 square miles. It's a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is the size of Germany. Marcus had expected this reaction. So you're not going to look? I didn't say that. Dawson pulled out a thick folder and opened it. After Victoria identified herself, I started digging. Missing persons reports from the last 3 years. Women between 20 and 35 disappeared without explanation. You know how many cases fit that profile in Montana alone? How many? 47. Dawson slid several photos across the desk. These are the ones that caught my attention. Women with similar characteristics to Victoria, professional, independent, no obvious reason to vanish. 7 of them disappeared under circumstances that raised flags. Marcus studied the faces. Young women, all with that same quality of self-sufficiency Victoria had described. Each photo was clipped to a missing persons report filled with details that read like epitaphs last seen. Clothing description, vehicle information, family contacts. Jennifer Holland, 28, corporate lawyer from Helena. Disappeared 14 months ago after telling her roommate she was meeting someone for dinner. Her car was found at a trailhead near Flathead Lake, keys in the ignition, phone on the front seat. Dawson tapped another photo. Rebecca Voss, 31, software developer from Bozeman. Vanished 22 months ago. She'd taken a week off work, told her boss she was going camping. Never came back. Flathead Lake, Marcus said. That's a Native American name, isn't it? Salish? Could be what Victoria remembered. Or could be coincidence. Dawson moved to the next photo. Marissa Chun, no relation to you, different spelling, 26. Accountant from Great Falls. Disappeared 38 months ago. Last seen at a professional networking event. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle, but her laptop and phone were never recovered. Marcus felt cold despite the office's stuffy heat. You think these could be his victims? I think they're worth investigating further. Problem is, most of these cases have gone cold. Families have moved on, evidence has degraded, trails have disappeared. And we still don't have any proof they're connected beyond Victoria's testimony that, according to Billings PD, might be unreliable due to trauma. You think she's lying? I think she's been through hell, and hell changes how people remember things. Dawson closed the folder. But I also think there's too much smoke here to ignore the possibility of fire. Someone did what Victoria described. Someone planned it meticulously. And people like that don't usually stop at one victim. Marcus thought about the clinical way Victoria had described the man's methods, testing burial sites, studying locations, treating murder like a science experiment. What do you need from me? Honestly? Nothing. This is a police matter now. You found Victoria. You gave your statement. You've done your part. Dawson fixed him with a hard stare. But I'm guessing that's not the answer you wanted to hear. She asked me to help look. Said I pay attention to abandoned places. And do you plan to? Marcus hesitated. The smart answer was no. The safe answer was to go home to Emma, focus on his ranch, let law enforcement handle the investigation. But he kept thinking about those 3 women, possibly still out there, waiting to be found. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to help. Part of me knows it's insane to get involved. Listen to the second part. Dawson stood and walked to his office window, looking out at Millbrook's quiet Main Street. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen good people get tangled up in bad situations because they wanted to help. Sometimes it works out. Usually it doesn't. And you've got a daughter to consider. Emma's why I'm hesitating. She should be why you walk away. Dawson turned back. But if you do decide to look around, and I'm not saying you should, I want to know about it. Any abandoned property you visit, any weird feeling you get, anything that doesn't sit right. You call me immediately. Understood? Marcus nodded. What happens next with the investigation? I'm coordinating with Billings PD and the state police. They're analyzing everything from St. Augustine's rope fibers, fingerprints, any trace evidence. We're also reaching out to missing persons units across the state, seeing if there are patterns we missed. And I'm having someone run through property records, looking for land purchases or rentals that might fit this guy's profile. Property records? He had to scout these locations somehow. Maybe he owns land or rents it, or has some legitimate reason to be familiar with remote areas. It's a long shot, but we're chasing every lead we've got. Dawson picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it down with a grimace. The truth is, Marcus, without more information or physical evidence, this investigation could take months. Years, even. The guy covered his tracks too well. What about the wedding? There had to be a venue, a caterer, witnesses. All paid in cash or with prepaid cards. The venue owner met Derek Sutherland exactly once. Said he seemed like a normal groom, maybe a little reserved. No red flags. The catering company never heard from him again after the initial deposit, which they had to refund because the wedding never happened. As far as the world is concerned, Derek Sutherland showed up, convinced Victoria Brennan to marry him, and vanished into thin air. Marcus felt frustration building. There has to be something. A mistake he made, a detail he overlooked. If there is, we haven't found it yet. Dawson walked into the door. Go home, Marcus. Hug your daughter. Work on your ranch. Let us handle this. But as Marcus drove away from the sheriff's office, he knew he wouldn't be able to let it go. The faces from those missing persons photos haunted him. Jennifer Holland with her lawyer's confidence, Rebecca Voss smiling at the camera, Marissa Chun in her professional headshot. All of them are someone's daughter, sister, friend. All of them are reduced to aging files and fading memories. He picked Emma up from school at 3:30. She bounded into the truck with her usual energy, chattering about a science project on the solar system and how her friend Madison had brought cupcakes for her birthday. Marcus listened and responded appropriately, but his mind was elsewhere. At home, he helped Emma with homework while dinner cooked spaghetti, her favorite. They ate together at the kitchen table, Emma still talking about her day, oblivious to the darkness occupying her father's thoughts. After dinner, they played cards until bedtime, and Marcus tucked her in with the same ritual they'd followed for 3 years. Story, glass of water, nightlight on, door cracked open. Dad? Emma's voice stopped him in the doorway. Yeah, Bug? Are you okay? You seem sad. Marcus returned to her bedside and smoothed her hair back. I'm fine. Just thinking about work stuff, ranch work or other work. Too perceptive. Little bit of both. The person you helped, are they getting better? Yeah, she is. Emma considered this, her 8-year-old mind working through something. I'm glad you helped her. Mom would have done the same thing. The mention of Sarah hit him like it always did, a sharp ache that never fully went away. You're right. She would have. So whatever you're thinking about that's making you sad, maybe ask yourself what Mom would do. Marcus stared at his daughter, amazed once again by her wisdom. When did you get so smart? I was born this way. Emma grinned. Now get out so I can sleep. He kissed her forehead and left, pulling the door nearly closed behind him. In his own room, Marcus sat on the bed and pulled out his laptop, an old machine he rarely used anymore, remnants of his previous life as a software engineer. He opened the browser and began searching. Missing women in Montana. Unsolved disappearances. Cold cases. The results overwhelmed him. Hundreds of cases. Decades of unsolved mysteries. Faces staring out from outdated websites and desperate Facebook posts. He narrowed his search, focusing on the timeframe Victoria had mentioned and the profiles Dawson had described. One name kept appearing, Jennifer Holland. The corporate lawyer who'd vanished near Flathead Lake. Her case had generated significant media attention initially, a successful young woman disappearing without a trace. Her car found abandoned at a popular trailhead. But as weeks turned to months with no new leads, coverage had dwindled. Now her case existed primarily on a memorial website maintained by her mother, filled with photos and pleas for information. Marcus clicked through the images. Jennifer hiking in the mountains. Jennifer at her law school graduation. Jennifer with her family at Christmas. A life frozen in time, preserved in pixels and hope. He found Rebecca Voss next, the software developer from Bozeman. Her disappearance had generated less media attention, perhaps because she'd told people she was going camping. The assumption was that she'd had an accident in the wilderness, fallen down a ravine, or gotten lost. Search and rescue had looked for 2 weeks before calling it off. Her parents still offered a reward for information. Marissa Chun's case was older, the online footprint smaller. An article from the Great Falls Tribune, a missing persons poster, a few social media shares that had long since been buried by time and algorithm. She'd simply vanished one day, her apartment locked from the outside, no signs of struggle or hurried departure. Police had investigated, but found nothing. Eventually, she joined the statistics, one of thousands who disappear each year without explanation. Marcus cross-referenced the disappearances with locations Victoria had mentioned. Flathead Lake fit the Native American name. He searched for abandoned mines near Bozeman, dozens of results, remnants of Montana's mining boom now left to decay. Cattle pastures near Great Falls. Thousands of acres of ranch land, most of it remote and unsupervised. He was chasing shadows. Dawson was right. This was a job for law enforcement, not a rancher with no training and a daughter to protect. But Emma's words echoed in his mind. What would Mom do? Sarah would have helped. She'd been a social worker, spent her life advocating for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. She'd believed that standing by when you could act was its own form of violence. She would have told him to be smart, be careful, but don't turn away. Marcus closed his laptop and walked to the window. The ranch stretched out in darkness, peaceful and isolated. Somewhere out there in Montana's vast emptiness, 3 women might be waiting to be found. And the man who'd put them there was still free, possibly hunting for his next victim. His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. Marcus opened it and felt his blood run cold. Thank you for visiting today. I've been thinking about what you said, about helping me find them. I know it's a lot to ask. But I remembered something else, something I didn't tell the police because I wasn't sure if it was real or a dream. The lake he mentioned? He said there was a red boathouse. I remember because he laughed about it, said it was like leaving a marker. If you decide to look, start there. Victoria, Marcus stared at the message. A red boathouse on a lake with a Native American name. Flathead Lake had dozens of boathouses scattered along its shoreline, maybe more. But it was something concrete, a detail that could be verified or eliminated. He texted back, "How did you get this number?" The response came quickly. Dr. Rothman gave it to me. Said you might be able to help where the police can't. I know I'm asking a lot. But please, Marcus. They're still out there. Marcus set the phone down and returned to his laptop. He pulled up satellite imagery of Flathead Lake, zooming in on the eastern shore where Jennifer Holland's car had been found. The lake was massive, nearly 30 miles long and up to 15 miles wide. Boathouses dotted the shoreline, most of them weathered and old. He began systematically scanning the images, looking for anything red. Most boathouses were natural wood or white, blending into the landscape. But then, near the northern end of the lake, he spotted it, a structure that appeared rust red in the satellite photo, partially hidden by trees. Sitting on a small cove away from the main recreational areas, Marcus took a screenshot, noting the coordinates. It could be nothing, just a random boathouse that happened to be red. But it could also be exactly what Victoria remembered. A marker. A place to start. He looked at the clock, almost midnight. Tomorrow he'd need to be up early for ranch work. Emma had school. Life continued its normal rhythms. But now he had coordinates, a lead, a thread to pull. Dawson's warning echoed in his head. Walk away. Let law enforcement handle it. Think about Emma. But so did Emma's question. What would Mom do? Marcus knew the answer. Sarah would have told him to be smart but brave. To help if he could, but protect their daughter above all else. To trust his instincts but verify everything. He sent the coordinates to his own email, then deleted the search history from his browser. If he was going to do this, he needed to be careful, methodical. The man Victoria described wasn't an impulsive killer, he was a planner, someone who thought steps ahead. Marcus could be methodical too. He'd spent 3 years learning Montana's back roads, exploring abandoned properties while searching for his ranch, memorizing the landscape. He knew how to move through empty spaces without being noticed. And he had something the killer probably didn't expect, motivation that went beyond professional duty. He'd found one victim alive. Maybe he could find the others, even if only to bring them home to their families. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the old house creak. Storm coming in, just like Harvey's knee had predicted. Marcus thought about Flathead Lake, about a red boathouse hidden in the trees. about secrets buried under Montana's big sky. Tomorrow he'd work the ranch and take care of Emma. But soon, very soon, he'd make the drive north to Flathead Lake and see what he could find. 3 days passed before Marcus could make the trip to Flathead Lake. 3 days of normal, routine feeding cattle, fixing a water line that had frozen overnight, helping Emma with her multiplication tables, pretending everything was fine. But the coordinates burned in his mind like a brand, and Victoria's text message haunted his quiet moments. On Thursday morning, Emma's school announced a field trip to the Science Museum in Billings. She'd be gone all day, chaperoned by teachers Marcus trusted. It was the opening he needed. He told Mrs. Kowalski he had business in Kalispell, not entirely a lie, since Flathead Lake was nearby. She agreed to be available if the school needed anything. And Marcus loaded his truck with supplies that might prove useful. A camera, work gloves, a rope, basic tools, and his old Army field kit that still contained a compass and topographical maps. The drive north took nearly 4 hours. Marcus followed Highway 93, watching the landscape transform from open prairie to pine forests and mountain ranges. Flathead Lake appeared in the distance like a sapphire set in green velvet, impossibly blue. Surrounded by peaks still dusted with early snow, he'd printed out detailed maps showing the location of the red boathouse. The coordinates pointed to a remote section of the eastern shore, accessible only by a narrow Forest Service road that wasn't marked on most GPS systems. Marcus found the turnoff just before noon, a gravel path barely wide enough for his truck. Overgrown with brush that scraped against his doors, the road wound through dense pine forest for 2 miles before opening onto a small clearing. Marcus parked and stepped out, immediately struck by the silence. No traffic sounds, no voices, no signs of human activity. Just wind through the trees and the distant cry of a hawk. Through the pines, he could see glimpses of blue water. Marcus grabbed his camera and field kit, then made his way toward the shore on foot. The ground was soft with pine needles, his boots making almost no sound. He moved carefully, aware that he was potentially walking into a crime scene, or worse, into danger. The boathouse appeared after 50 yards, exactly where the satellite image had shown it. The structure was old, maybe 40 years, built from weathered timber that had been painted red at some point, but now showed more rust than color. It sat on a small dock extending into a protected cove, surrounded by trees that would make it invisible from the main lake. Marcus stopped at the tree line, studying the scene. The boathouse's door hung open slightly, swaying in the breeze. No boats were visible inside. The dock showed signs of decay. Several boards were missing, others sagged dangerously. This wasn't a recreational property anymore. It had been abandoned for years. He pulled out his phone to call Dawson, then realized he had no service. Too remote. He was on his own. Moving slowly, Marcus approached the boathouse. His senses were heightened, every sound amplified. A branch cracked under his boot and he froze, heart pounding. Nothing moved. He continued forward. The dock groaned under his weight but held. Marcus reached the boathouse entrance and pushed the door open wider, letting light spill into the dim interior. The space was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet, and mostly empty. Old life jackets hung from hooks, disintegrating with age. A rusty anchor lay in one corner. Broken fishing rods. Nothing unusual. But then Marcus noticed the floor. Most of the boathouse had wooden planking, typical for structures built over water. But in the back corner, several boards looked newer, less weathered. Someone had replaced them, and recently. The nails were cleaner, the wood less gray. Marcus knelt beside the boards, examining them closely. They'd been installed carefully, meant to blend in. But to someone looking for inconsistencies, they stood out. He pulled out his multi-tool and wedged the screwdriver under one board's edge. The wood lifted too easily. These boards weren't properly secured. They were meant to be moved. Beneath the boards was darkness. Marcus pulled out his flashlight and shined it into the gap. At first he saw only water, the lake visible through gaps in the dock's foundation. But then his light caught something else. A shape wrapped in dark plastic, weighted down with chains, suspended in the water beneath the boathouse. Marcus's hands shook as he pulled up more boards. The shape became clearer, roughly 6 feet long, cylindrical, definitely man-made. His stomach turned as he realized what he was looking at. A body. Had to be. He needed to call this in immediately, but his phone still showed no service. Marcus took several photographs, documenting everything: the boathouse, the replaced boards, the submerged package. Then he carefully replaced the boards exactly as he'd found them and backed away. His mind raced as he returned to his truck. Jennifer Holland had disappeared 14 months ago near this lake. If that was her beneath the boathouse, she'd been there all this time. Hidden in plain sight in a location most people had forgotten existed. Marcus drove until he found cell service, then pulled over and called Dawson. The sheriff answered on the first ring. "I'm at Flathead Lake," Marcus said without preamble. "Eastern Shore, about 10 miles north of Polson. There's an abandoned red boathouse, and I think I found Jennifer Holland." "Silence then. Please tell me you didn't go there alone." "I had to. Emma was on a school trip, and I had the coordinates Victoria gave me." "Dawson, there's something in the water under the boathouse. Something wrapped and weighted." "I didn't touch it, just photographed everything." "Jesus Christ, Marcus." Dawson's frustration was palpable. "You could have compromised the entire scene. You could have put yourself in danger. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking 3 women might be dead and nobody else was looking." Marcus kept his voice steady. "Are you going to send someone out here or not?" Another pause, then the sound of papers rustling. "Give me the exact location. I'll contact the Flathead County Sheriff and get a team out there. But Marcus, you need to leave, now. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. Just go home." Marcus provided the coordinates and directions, then sat in his truck for a long moment after hanging up. His hands were still shaking. In all his scenarios about how this might unfold, he'd never really believed he'd find something. Part of him had hoped Victoria's memories were confused, that the other victims existed only in trauma-induced nightmares, but they were real. At least one of them was real. The drive home felt surreal. Marcus stopped in Kalispell for gas and coffee, needing the caffeine and normalcy. The gas station clerk chatted about the weather, completely unaware that the man pumping diesel had just discovered what might be a murder victim. Emma's school bus dropped her off at 6:30, and she burst through the door full of stories about the museum exhibits and the planetarium show. Marcus listened and responded, but part of his mind remained at Flathead Lake. Wondering what investigators were finding, his phone rang at 8 o'clock. "Dawson, we recovered a body," the sheriff said without preamble. "Female, been in the water approximately 12 to 14 months, based on preliminary examination. Dental records will take a few days to confirm identity, but the timeline matches Jennifer Holland's disappearance." Marcus closed Emma's bedroom door and moved to his own room. "How did she die?" "Can't say yet. There's evidence of trauma, but the medical examiner needs to do a full autopsy." Dawson's voice was heavy. "Marcus, you found her. You actually found her. Flathead County Sheriff wants to talk to you, probably tomorrow. They'll need to know how you located that boathouse. I'll tell them everything Victoria told me. That brings up another issue. Victoria's testimony might become crucial to this case now that we have a body. Her description of the killer's methods, the locations, it's all suddenly much more credible. Which means she could be in danger if the killer learns she's talking." Marcus hadn't considered that. "You think he'd come after her?" "I think he's smart enough to cover his tracks. If he knows we found Jennifer Holland, he might assume Victoria led us there. And if he's planning to eliminate loose ends..." Dawson trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. "What about the other 2 victims? The one in the mountains near mining equipment, and the first one in the cattle pasture? We're working on it. I've got deputies cross-referencing abandoned mines in central Montana with missing persons reports. The pasture location is tougher. That could be anywhere. But now that we know Victoria's information was accurate, we're taking everything she said seriously. After hanging up, Marcus sat on his bed and stared at the wall. He'd helped find Jennifer Holland, given her family answers they'd been seeking for over a year. But 2 more women were still out there, and somewhere a nameless killer was continuing his pattern. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Did you find her?" Marcus hesitated, then replied, "Yes, the police are handling it now." "You were right about everything." The response came quickly. "Thank you for believing me. For looking when no one else would. The other 2 are still out there, Marcus. He told me about them. Please don't stop." Marcus typed and deleted several responses before settling on. "The police are investigating. You need to be careful. If the killer knows we found Jennifer, he might come looking for you. I'm not afraid of him anymore. I'm afraid of him hurting someone else." That night, sleep came in fragments. Marcus dreamed of cold water and red boathouses, of women in wedding dresses calling for help from dark places. He woke at 3 a.m., gave up at 4, and was feeding cattle by 5:30. The Flathead County Sheriff called at 9 a.m. A deputy named Sarah Martinez asked polite but pointed questions about how Marcus had located the boathouse, what he'd observed, whether he'd told anyone else about the location. Marcus answered honestly, knowing anything less would compromise the investigation. "You understand you could have contaminated evidence," Martinez said. "That your actions, while well-intentioned, may have complicated prosecution. I understand. But if I hadn't gone there, how long would Jennifer Holland have remained undiscovered?" Martinez couldn't answer that. She thanked him for his cooperation and said he should expect more questions as the investigation progressed. Dawson called an hour later with an update. "Dental records confirm it's Jennifer Holland. Her family's been notified. They're devastated but grateful to finally have answers." He paused. "They also want to thank you personally. I told them maybe after the investigation concludes." "How? Did she die?" "Blunt force trauma to the head, probably before she went in the water. M.E. thinks she was dead or dying when she was submerged. Small mercy, I guess." Dawson's voice was grim. "We're analyzing everything, the plastic wrapping, the chains, water samples, surrounding soil. Trying to find any forensic evidence that might lead to the killer." "What about the other locations Victoria mentioned?" "We're searching. I've got a team looking at abandoned mines within a 100-mile radius of Bozeman. That's where Rebecca Voss disappeared from. There are more than we expected, and most are on private property." "It's slow going," Dawson sighed. "The cattle pasture is even harder. We'd need specific details, fence types, landmarks, anything that narrows it down. Montana has over 28 million acres of ranch land. Without more information, we're searching blind." Marcus thought about Marissa Chun, possibly buried in a pasture somewhere, surrounded by cattle that grazed over her grave. The killer had said it was a test seeing if animals would disturb the burial site. Scientific, clinical, monstrous. "I want to help," Marcus said, "with the search." "Marcus, you've done enough, more than enough. Let us handle it from here. You said yourself you're searching blind. I know ranches. I know what to look for: abandoned sections, areas where cattle don't graze, disturbed soil. And I can move faster than an official investigation because I don't need warrants or permissions. I'm just a rancher checking out properties. You're talking about trespassing and potentially interfering with evidence. I'm talking about finding those women before their families spend years wondering what happened." Marcus's voice was firm. Jennifer Holland's family got answers. Rebecca Voss's family and Marissa Chun's family deserve the same. Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "If you do this, and I'm not saying you should, you need to be smart. Don't go alone if you can help it. Don't touch anything. Take photographs and send them to me immediately. And Marcus, if you find something, you call me before you do anything else. Understood? Understood. And for God's sake, be careful. This guy is still out there. After hanging up, Marcus stared at his property maps. He'd spent 3 years exploring Montana's rural areas, learning the landscape, meeting other ranchers. He had connections and knowledge law enforcement couldn't match. But he also had Emma to protect. And a life he'd built carefully after everything fell apart. Sarah would have told him to help but stay safe. To do what was right while being smart about it. Marcus opened his laptop and began researching abandoned mines near Bozeman, looking for anything that matched Victoria's description. He'd found Jennifer Holland. Maybe he could find the others too. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the prairie. Winter was coming early this year, just like everyone predicted. Marcus had work to do before the snow arrived on the ranch and beyond. Marcus spent the next week balancing 2 lives, the one where he was a rancher and father, and the one where he was hunting for evidence of a serial killer's crimes. During the day, he maintained normalcy. Emma's school schedule continued unchanged. The cattle still needed feeding. Fences still required mending. He'd established a routine with Mrs. Kowalski where she'd check in daily, just in case something happened while he was investigating. But the nights belonged to research. His dining room table had transformed into a command center, covered with printed maps, missing persons reports, and satellite imagery. He'd marked Jennifer Holland's location with a red pin, then started mapping the other disappearances Victoria had mentioned. Rebecca Voss had vanished 22 months ago near Bozeman after telling colleagues she was going camping. Marcus cross-referenced her last known location with abandoned mining operations in the area. Montana's mining history was extensive: copper, silver, gold, and many old sites had been left to decay when operations ceased decades ago. He found 18 abandoned mines within 50 miles of Bozeman. Most were on public land or in areas accessible by hiking trails. But 3 stood out because they were isolated, difficult to reach, and showed signs of recent activity in satellite photos, vehicle tracks, disturbed earth, things that suggested someone had visited when they shouldn't have. The closest was the old Silverbow mine, 30 miles east of Bozeman in the Bridger Mountains. Records showed it had closed in 1987, and the property had changed hands multiple times before being abandoned completely. The access road had been blocked off, but Marcus could see in aerial photos that someone had driven around the barriers. On Saturday morning, Marcus told Emma they were going on an adventure exploring old mining sites for a photography project. It wasn't entirely false. He did plan to document everything. But more importantly, he wasn't going alone. After Victoria's warning and Dawson's concerns, Marcus had decided bringing Emma on certain trips was actually safer than leaving her behind where she might become leverage. They packed lunch, camera equipment, and warm clothes. Emma chattered excitedly about seeing real mines, asking if I'd find gold or gemstones. Marcus let her enthusiasm fill the truck cab, grateful for the distraction from his darker purpose. The drive took 2 hours, winding through mountain passes already showing signs of winter's approach. Snow dusted the higher peaks, and the air had that crystalline quality that comes before serious cold sets in. They found the Silverbow mine. Access road blocked by a rusted gate with a no trespassing sign hanging at an angle. Marcus parked the truck and studied the area. Fresh tire tracks curved around the gate through a gap in the fence. Someone had been here recently, within the last few weeks, based on how the grass had been crushed. "Stay close to me," Marcus told Emma as they walked around the barrier. "Old mines can be dangerous. We're just looking from the outside, okay?" "Okay, Dad." The mine entrance was a quarter-mile up the mountain, barely visible through the pines. As they climbed, Marcus photographed everything: the tire tracks, broken, tree branches at vehicle height, places where the ground showed signs of recent disturbance. The mine itself was a gaping mouth in the mountainside, reinforced with rotting timber that looked ready to collapse. A faded warning sign declared the structure unsafe. Rusted equipment lay scattered around the entrance, an old ore cart, pickaxes, metal drums leaking unidentifiable substances. But it was what Marcus found 30 feet to the left of the entrance that made his blood run cold. Fresh concrete. A patch about 4 feet square, poured recently enough that some bags of mix still lay nearby, protected from weather by a tarp weighted with rocks. Emma wandered toward the mine entrance, fascinated. "Dad, can we go inside? Just a little bit?" "Absolutely not. Those timbers could collapse." Marcus kept his voice calm while his mind raced. Why would someone pour fresh concrete at an abandoned mine? Unless they were covering something, sealing something in. He photographed the concrete from multiple angles, then checked his phone. No service as expected. He'd have to send the photos to Dawson once they were back in range. "Let's explore around the other side," Marcus suggested, guiding Emma away from the concrete patch. They circled the area, and Marcus found more evidence: boot prints in soft earth near a stream, a discarded water bottle that looked fairly new, and most disturbing, a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. The fabric was blue, weathered but not ancient. Rebecca Voss had been wearing a blue jacket when she disappeared. Marcus carefully photographed the fabric without touching it, marking the location in his GPS. His hands were steady, but inside he felt sick. This wasn't just exploring anymore. This was standing at what might be Rebecca Voss's grave. They returned to the truck an hour later. Emma climbed in happily, clutching some interesting rocks she'd collected. Marcus drove until he found cell service, then pulled over and immediately called Dawson. "Silver Bow Mine," Marcus said. "East of Bozeman. Fresh concrete poured maybe 2 months ago, right next to the entrance. Boot prints. Fabric that matches what Rebecca Voss was wearing when she disappeared. You need to get a team out here." Dawson swore quietly. "You brought Emma with you?" "Safer than leaving her behind if this guy knows who I am." Marcus glanced at his daughter, who was examining her rocks. "We're heading home now." "But Dawson, I think Rebecca Voss is under that concrete." "I'll contact the Gallatin County Sheriff. They'll need ground-penetrating radar, excavation equipment. This is going to take time." Dawson paused. "Marcus, if you're right about this, you found 2 victims in a week. That's going to draw attention. From law enforcement, from media, possibly from the killer." "I know. Be careful. Watch your back. And maybe consider taking a break from investigating." But Marcus couldn't stop now. Not with one more victim still missing, Marissa Chun, the first victim. Allegedly buried in a cattle pasture somewhere in the Great Falls area. Over the next 3 days, Marcus watched news reports as authorities descended on the Silver Bow mine. They brought equipment, forensic specialists, and cadaver dogs. On Wednesday, they confirmed what Marcus had suspected: human remains under the fresh concrete, buried in a shallow grave and covered to prevent discovery. Dental records would take time. But the timeline matched Rebecca Voss's disappearance. Her family received the news with the same mixture of grief and relief that Jennifer Holland's family had. Expressed the agony of confirmation tempered by the end of uncertainty. Victoria called Marcus that evening. Her voice was stronger now, more stable. "You found her. You found both of them." She sounded like she was crying. "Do you know what this means? My sister Jenna has been calling me crazy. The police thought I was traumatized and confused. But you proved I was telling the truth." "You were always telling the truth," Marcus said. "I just had to look in the right places. There's still one more. Marissa Chun, the first victim." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. He talked about her differently than the others. Sound she taught him patience because she fought the longest. Said he buried her deep in a pasture where cattle grazed, and he visited the site months later to see if animals had disturbed it. When they hadn't, he knew his method worked. That could be anywhere in Montana. Millions of acres of cattle country. I know. But I've been thinking when he told me about her, he mentioned seeing antelope while he was digging. Specifically antelope, not deer or elk. Does that help narrow it down? Marcus considered this. Pronghorn antelope had specific habitat preferences, open grasslands, usually at lower elevations. They weren't found everywhere in Montana, particularly not in the mountainous western regions. It helps, he said. Antelope favor the eastern plains. Combined with the Great Falls area where Marissa disappeared from, that gives us a more specific region to search. Will you look? Please. Marcus thought about Emma, about the risk he was taking, about how much he'd already exposed himself. But he also thought about Marissa Chin's family, still wondering after 38 months what had happened to their daughter. I'll look, he promised. The search for Marissa Chun proved more challenging than the others. Marcus spent days studying property maps, identifying ranches near Great Falls with significant acreage and areas where cattle grazed. He was looking for something specific, a section of pasture that would have been accessible 38 months ago but remained relatively unused. He started by talking to other ranchers, using his local connections. At feed stores and equipment suppliers, he'd casually mention he was looking for additional grazing land to lease, asking about properties that might be available. Most leads went nowhere, but gradually he built a picture of the area's abandoned or underutilized ranches. One name kept appearing, the old Mackenzie property, a 3,000-acre ranch that had been in probate for 5 years after the owner died without clear heirs. The property sat empty, technically owned by the state, but not actively managed. Locals said cattle from neighboring ranches sometimes drifted onto the land, but no one really maintained it. Marcus drove out on a Friday morning, leaving Emma with Mrs. Kowalski and telling her he was checking on some cattle that had wandered off. The Mackenzie property was 40 miles northeast of Great Falls, accessible by a county road that deteriorated into dirt track after the first few miles. The landscape was classic Montana grassland, rolling hills, sparse trees, endless sky. Beautiful and empty. Perfect for hiding secrets. Marcus parked his truck where the road ended and continued on foot, scanning the ground for any signs of disturbance. The challenge was that 38 months had passed. Vegetation would have grown back. Weather would have erased surface evidence. He was looking for subtle signs. Areas where grass grew differently, depressions in the ground, places cattle avoided. He found it 3 hours later, a slight depression in a low-lying area near a dried-up creek bed. The grass there was greener, healthier than the surrounding vegetation, consistent with decomposition, enriching the soil. Marcus had learned about this in his army training. Bodies changed the chemistry of earth they were buried in, often promoting plant growth. More tellingly, cattle trails crisscrossed the entire pasture except for this spot. Animals had instincts about death. They avoided areas associated with it. Marcus photographed everything, marked GPS coordinates, and used a soil probe he'd brought to test the ground depth. At 18 inches, the probe hit something that wasn't rock or hard clay, something with give to it. His stomach churned. He was standing on what might be Marissa Chun's grave. He called Dawson immediately. Mackenzie property, northeast of Great Falls. I think I found her. This time, Dawson didn't argue or warn him off. GPS coordinates? Marcus provided them, along with detailed descriptions of everything he'd observed. The ground's been disturbed, probably within the last few years. Different vegetation, cattle avoidance patterns, soil probe indicates something buried shallow. I'll get a team out there today. Marcus, Dawson paused. If this is her, you've found all 3 victims. You've done something law enforcement couldn't do with all our resources and training. That's remarkable and disturbing in equal measure. Why disturbing? Because you found them the same way he picked them, by knowing the landscape, understanding isolation, recognizing patterns. You think like he does. The observation unsettled Marcus more than he wanted to admit. He returned home to find Emma making cookies with Mrs. Kowalski, the kitchen filled with the warm smell of chocolate chips and normalcy. He hugged his daughter tightly, grateful for her presence that anchored him to goodness. That night, as Emma slept, Marcus received a call from an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer, then decided investigative caution warranted picking up. Double quotes, Mr. Chun. A woman's voice, professional and measured. My name is Special Agent Lisa Park with the FBI. I've been coordinating with local law enforcement on the Victoria Brennan case and the subsequent discoveries. I was hoping we could talk. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. Federal involvement meant this had escalated beyond local investigations. What do you need to know? Everything. How you located these sites, what Victoria Brennan told you, your methodology. Mr. Chun, you found 3 alleged victims of a serial predator in less than 2 weeks. That's an extraordinary achievement, and it raises questions. What kind of questions? How you knew where to look. How you were able to find locations law enforcement couldn't. Whether you might have information you haven't shared yet. Park's voice remained neutral. But Marcus heard the implication. You think I'm involved? I think you're either remarkably lucky, remarkably skilled, or remarkably informed. I need to determine which. They arranged to meet the following Monday at the sheriff's office in Millbrook. Park said she was driving in from the FBI's Salt Lake City field office and bringing a forensic team to examine the Mackenzie property. After hanging up, Marcus sat in darkness, thinking about how quickly his life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been an anonymous rancher raising his daughter in peaceful obscurity. Now he was being investigated by the FBI for crimes he'd helped solve. Dawson called an hour later with confirmation. We found her. Ground-penetrating radar showed remains at the location you marked. Excavation starts tomorrow, but the forensic anthropologist says the burial is consistent with what you described: shallow grave. Approximately 3 years old, protected by natural depression. Marissa Chun, the first victim. Finally found. The FBI wants to talk to me, Marcus said. I know. Park called me too. She's thorough but fair. Just tell her the truth, how Victoria contacted you, what she remembered, how you used that information to narrow search parameters. You haven't done anything wrong. Except trespassing on private property, contaminating potential crime scenes, conducting unauthorized investigations. You found 3 murder victims that would have remained missing indefinitely without your intervention. Any prosecutor would see you as a hero, not a criminal. Dawson's voice was firm. Park knows that too. She's just covering bases, making sure we have a complete picture. But Marcus couldn't shake his unease. Finding the victims had felt right, necessary. Now he was entangled in a federal investigation with implications he couldn't fully predict. Emma noticed his distraction at breakfast Saturday morning. Dad, you're being weird again. Just tired, bug. Is it about the person you helped? The one from the church? Marcus set down his coffee. Yeah, it's gotten complicated. Are you in trouble? No. But sometimes doing the right thing creates complications. Emma considered this with the seriousness only children can muster. Mom used to say that doing right things is hard, but hard doesn't mean wrong. Sarah's wisdom filtered through their daughter's memory. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. Your mom was very smart. I know. That's why I'm smart too. Emma grinned. Are you going to keep helping? I think I already helped as much as I can. Now other people need to do their jobs. Over the weekend, news broke nationally. 3 bodies discovered in Montana, all linked to a serial predator who had operated undetected for years. Victoria Brennan was identified as a survivor who had escaped his captivity. Media descended on Millbrook like locusts, camping outside the sheriff's office and the general store. Interviewing anyone willing to talk. Harvey called Marcus Saturday afternoon. Got reporters asking about you, saying you're the one who found those women. I told them I don't know nothing about nothing, but they're persistent. Thanks, Harvey. I appreciate your discretion. You did a good thing, Marcus. Don't let nobody tell you different. Marcus kept Emma home on Monday. Not wanting her exposed to media attention at school, Mrs. Kowalski stayed with her while Marcus drove to his meeting with Agent Park. The FBI agent was younger then. Marcus expected mid-30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything. She sat across from him in Dawson's office, a digital recorder between them, and proceeded to methodically extract every detail of the past. 2 weeks. Marcus answered honestly. Victoria's call from the hospital. The details she'd remembered about locations, his knowledge of Montana's geography, his systematic approach to narrowing search parameters. Park listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. After 2 hours, she turned off the recorder. Mr. Chun, I'm going to be direct with you. What you've accomplished is remarkable. You located 3 victims using intuition and local knowledge in places we would have eventually searched but might have taken months or years to find. However, your actions have also complicated our investigation. Marcus tensed. How? Defense attorneys will argue evidence was compromised by civilian interference. Chain of custody is questionable. Proper procedures weren't followed. Park held up a hand as Marcus started to protest. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm explaining how this will play out in court, if we ever catch the perpetrator. So, I hurt the case by finding them. No, you brought closure to 3 families and confirmed Victoria Brennan's testimony. That's invaluable. But moving forward, I need you to step back. No more investigating. No more searching. If you find anything else, you call law enforcement immediately and don't touch anything. Park's expression softened slightly. You have a daughter to protect. This killer is still out there, and now he knows someone is finding his victims. That makes you a potential target. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus hadn't fully processed that reality. He'd been so focused on finding the victims, he hadn't considered that the killer might focus on him in return. What about Victoria? Is she safe? She's in protective custody. We've moved her to a secure location under an assumed name. Her sister knows where she is, but very few others. Park stood, signaling the interview's end. Go home, Mr. Chun. Hug your daughter. Let us handle it from here. Marcus drove back to his ranch feeling both relieved and unsettled. He'd done what he set out to do, found the victims, validated Victoria's story, given families answers. But Park's warning echoed. The killer was still out there. That night, Marcus triple-checked his locks and loaded his shotgun for the first time since moving to Montana. He placed it in his bedroom closet where Emma couldn't reach, but he could access quickly if needed. The next morning, Emma returned to school. Life resumed its patterns, though Marcus found himself constantly vigilant, watching for vehicles that didn't belong, faces he didn't recognize, any sign that danger had followed him home. A week passed. Then, too, the media moved on to other stories. Federal investigators continued their work, analyzing evidence from all 3 burial sites, searching for forensic links to the perpetrator. Dawson kept Marcus updated. They'd found DNA evidence, but no matches in any database. Whoever this man was, he'd never been arrested or printed. Victoria called occasionally. She was recovering, physically and mentally, though she admitted the nightmares persisted. Her sister Jenna had brought her back to Seattle once doctors cleared her for travel. She was starting therapy and trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered. I can never thank you enough, Victoria said during one call. You believed me when nobody else would. You found them when everyone said it was impossible. I just followed the clues you gave me. No, you cared enough to try. That's rarer than you think. Victoria paused. Have they found him yet? Not yet. But they're looking. He's too smart to get caught easily. He planned everything so carefully. Fear crept into her voice. What if he never gets caught? What if he just starts over somewhere else? Marcus didn't have a comforting answer. The statistical reality was that many serial predators operated for years or decades before being apprehended, if they ever were. 3 weeks after his FBI interview, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. He was repairing fence line when a black SUV pulled up to his property. A man in his 50s emerged, dressed in expensive outdoor gear that looked purchased yesterday. Mr. Chun? I'm Thomas Holland, Jennifer's father. Marcus set down his tools, recognizing the name. Mr. Holland, I'm so sorry for your loss. I wanted to thank you in person. The FBI said you're the one who found my daughter. Holland's voice was steady, but his eyes were red-rimmed. We'd spent 14 months not knowing. Every day wondering if she'd just walked away from her life, if we'd done something wrong, if she was alive somewhere and chose not to contact us. The not knowing was torture. I wish I could have found her sooner. Or prevented what happened. You gave us closure. We can bury our daughter now. Say goodbye properly. That's a gift I can never repay. Holland pulled an envelope from his jacket. I wanted you to have this. It's not about the money. I know you didn't do this for reward. But Jennifer had a college fund we'd been saving since she was born. She never used it. I'd like you to use it for your daughter's education. Marcus tried to refuse, but Holland insisted, pressing the envelope into his hands. Inside was a check for $50,000. Mr. Holland, I can't. Please. Let me do this. Let Jennifer's memory help another child have opportunities. Holland's composure cracked slightly. My daughter died afraid and alone. But you made sure she came home. That matters more than you know. After Holland left, Marcus sat on his porch holding the envelope and crying for the first time since Sarah's death. He cried for Jennifer and Rebecca and Marissa, for lives cut short by senseless cruelty. He cried for Victoria, surviving but forever changed. He cried for Emma, growing up in a world where such evil existed. But he also felt something else, a sense that he'd honored Sarah's memory by helping, when he could have walked away. She would have been proud of him for looking, for refusing to accept that those women should remain lost. That evening, Emma asked what Mr. Holland had wanted. He thanked me for something I did, Marcus said carefully. Something good? I helped find his daughter when she was lost. Emma processed this, then hugged him fiercely. I'm glad you help people, Dad, even when it's scary. It was a little scary, Marcus admitted. But you did it anyway. That's what brave means. Months passed. Winter arrived in earnest, blanketing the ranch in snow and confining their activities mostly to the house and barn. The investigation continued in the background. Marcus received occasional updates from Dawson. Though progress was slow, they'd identified trace evidence at all 3 burial sites, but still couldn't match it to anyone in existing databases. Victoria had worked with a forensic artist to create a composite sketch of Derek Sutherland. But facial recognition searches had yielded nothing conclusive. The man remained a ghost, no fingerprints in the system, no DNA matches, no criminal history. He existed only in Victoria's memories and the evidence of his crimes. In January, Marcus used part of the Holland family's gift to establish a college fund for Emma. The rest he donated to organizations that helped survivors of violent crime. Feeling that was what Jennifer would have wanted, life settled into new rhythms. Emma excelled at school. The ranch prospered. Marcus even started dating again, cautiously, slowly, with a veterinarian from Billings who understood his need for privacy and his commitment to Emma. But he never forgot those 2 weeks, when he'd hunted a killer's secrets across Montana's vast landscape. When he'd used intuition and persistence to find what law enforcement couldn't. When he'd proven that sometimes ordinary people could do extraordinary things, Aunt Victoria sent him a card in March. "1 year since you found me. I'm alive because you cared enough to stop. I'm healing because you believed me. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." The killer was never caught. Despite extensive investigations, advanced forensics, and nationwide manhunts, the man who called himself Derek Sutherland remained unidentified. He'd covered his tracks too well, planned too carefully, existed too far outside normal society to leave traditional traces. But 3 families had closure because Marcus Chun had driven into Millbrook for groceries and diesel, had noticed something white behind an abandoned chapel, had cared enough to investigate. 3 women had been found and brought home. 1 woman had survived to tell their story, and somewhere out there, a killer knew that someone had unraveled his carefully constructed mystery. That might not be justice, but it was something. Marcus stood on his porch on a spring evening, watching Emma play with the new puppy they'd adopted. The prairie stretched endlessly before him, beautiful and dangerous and full of secrets. He'd found 3. How many more remained hidden under Montana's big sky? He didn't know. But he knew that if he ever stumbled across another mystery, another person who needed finding, he wouldn't walk away, because Sarah had taught him that standing by when you could act was its own form of violence. And Emma was teaching him that brave meant doing the right thing even when it was scary. That was enough. It had to be. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Marcus called Emma inside, locked the doors, and settled into the evening routine that had become their life. Tomorrow he'd work the ranch. Tomorrow he'd be a father and neighbor and friend. But tonight, he was grateful for every ordinary moment, knowing how quickly ordinary could shatter, and how important it was to rebuild afterward. The woman in the wedding dress had whispered, "Please have mercy." Marcus had given her something better. He'd given her justice, truth, and the chance to survive. Sometimes, that was all anyone could do. Sometimes that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.